Hello, friends. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Elliot Parker, and whether you're a writer, a reader, or just a lover of words, I invite you to stop what you are doing and join me for a page break. On this episode of Page Break, we're going to be talking about short stories. And in fact, I've titled this episode Short Reviews About Short Stories. I've got 4 collections of short stories that I'm going to share with you momentarily, and I'm excited to share these with you. These are 4 collections that I've read here recently as we move through the end of July and into early August, which I can't believe it's already the end of July and early August, but here we are. And these are 4 collections of short stories that I've read recently that I think you're really going to enjoy. And if you're a lover of short stories or you're new to the genre for the first time, I think this collection of short stories, if you're new to the genre, is a good place to start. But before we get to that, I wanted to talk for just a couple minutes about why I like short stories and short story collections and kind of the interesting path that short story collections have taken here recently when it comes to readership and publishing. I think I've mentioned on the channel here before, I'm an author of a collection of short stories called Snapshots, and I'm currently working on another collection of short stories, which I hope to have finished by the end of the year, titled Table for Two. So I'm looking forward to working on that. I've had a lot of fun working on that over the last year, and I hope to have those ready to be finished or to be edited or revised by the end of the year. So we'll see if I meet that goal. But in any case, I feel like as a writer, and as a reader, especially when I was growing up, I gravitated towards short stories. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that when I was in junior high and high school, we had those textbook readers, those textbook readers that often were assigned on the first day of school. And we read through those all throughout the school year. And mostly those were collections of short stories. And these were the types of stories that were collected from a variety of places. They had different genres in them. There was science fiction, there was mystery, there was romance. It kind of ran the gamut in terms of the time period and the cultural thematics associated with those. A lot of you remember those from your junior high and high school years. Those were the Houghton Mifflin readers. Those were the Macmillan Elements of Literature readers that you might be familiar with. So that was my first exposure to short stories. And I think that was a great way to teach us then, but also get us reading, but teach us a little bit about how storytelling works and how a narrative is constructed from beginning to end. And as a writer, I feel like when I was learning how to write and I was learning how to craft stories and I was learning how to tell my own stories, I learned how to write. And I feel like I cut my teeth as a writer writing short stories because there are so many skills that you learn in short story writing that will help you in a variety of different other genres. Or if you want to write a novel or if you want to write a screenplay or whatever it might be, a lot of what you learn from short story writing really helps in those other genres. And I'll talk more about that here in just a second. When I think about short story writing, though, I think about what Kurt Vonnegut says about short story writing. And Kurt Vonnegut's one of my favorite writers. He wrote Slaughterhouse-Five, which is one of my favorite books, Breakfast of Champions, and a variety of other things as well that you may be familiar with. But he said with short story writing, he said, you need to get right to the point. You need to tell the reader as much as you can, as early as you can. Don't worry about suspense. Don't worry about surprising them. Don't worry about holding off a key detail until you get to the end of the story. Tell them as much as they need to know right from the top so they know exactly where they are, who's involved, what's going on, and kind of the direction that the story is going to take. And I feel like as a writer, that helps me tremendously with short stories. It's learning how to create interesting and dynamic characters really from the first page. Looking at short stories is also, and writing short stories is also a great exercise in setting. How do you build this world and give the reader a sense of where they are, not just the time period, but the actual physical space or the physical place that the story is taking place. And you really learn about how important words are and how important word choice is and how important the economy of words is when you are writing short stories, because you don't have a lot of space to convey the idea and convey the meaning and get the reader interested in what's happening to your characters. You don't have 250, 300, 350 pages like you do in a novel, or you can't wait till you get to poem 13 of your collection to give the reader a sense of what the thematics are related to that piece of work. You've got to get right to it early on. And so those are the skills I really learned from short story writing. And as I became more of a reader outside of things that we had to read for school, and as I finished my MFA program at Eastern Kentucky University, I found myself writing creatively and going back to short stories, even if it was I was in the midst of another project or I was working on a novel or something else. I found myself sort of stepping away from that text for a while or that story for a while and going back and immersing myself in short stories. And short stories have had a really interesting publishing history here recently. I can remember going to a lot of book festivals and book conferences and listening to agents and authors and publishers on panels talk about short stories, 10, 12 years ago. And a lot of them said, hey, short stories are great to write. They're great to get published in literary journals if you want to do that. Or if you're trying to get your career established as a writer, short stories and short story publications are a great way to do that. But don't send us a short story collection and expect it to be a mainstream publication. Now, there's been a variety of different presses, micro presses, small presses, literary presses that have been publishing short story collections for the last 40 or 50 years. And they've done it against sort of that trend of sort of the big publishers or the medium-sized to large publishers stepping away from short stories. We've talked about Orison Books on this channel before. We've talked about Saraband Books before on this channel. We've talked about some other presses that have been publishing short story collections for a long time. University presses, Ohio University Press, Ohio State University Press, University of Kentucky Press. A lot of those have also been publishing short story collections for a long time, but it wasn't a mainstream type of publication that you would see very often. And I can remember thinking, well, gosh, I love to write short stories and I love to read short stories. Why can't this catch hold? Well, fast forward to 2022. If you've gone to your local bookstore lately, look at the best-selling shelves or look at those books that are on the shelves that are facing you when you come through the store and count how many short story collections are listed there. The shift has changed. Short story collections are back. They are in vogue now, and they are something that people are interested in reading and that people are buying in large quantities. And so now the medium-sized publishers and the big publishers out of New York are having to take notice of that. And you're starting to see a lot of short story collections be published by both established writers like Walter Mosley, but also some new and upcoming writers as well. They're getting their break in the market by publishing a short story collection. So it's interesting to see that. My theory, my personal theory on why that is, why we've seen short story collections becoming more popular and becoming more in the mainstream is because this is the society and this is the attention span that we live in. We live in sort of this soundbite, Facebook, Instagram society where we get information in small bits. We get information condensed down into one screen of text or one page of text or one comment or one thread. And that's how we consume and absorb information. And short stories give you that by the nature of how they're constructed. You can get that same literary reading experience, but in a short, condensed format. So I think because our attention spans have changed and our society has changed in terms of how we get and consume information, short stories have become popular. Plus, I think you have a lot of people who live in big cities that have long commutes, and they like to read short stories. The same is true for audiobooks. I know a lot of people that I know that live in big cities and have an hour and a half commute to and from work every day. They get their reading done through audiobooks because they're sitting in traffic for so long. I had some friends that used to live in Washington, D.C. They rode the Metro, if you're familiar with that, in from Alexandria, Virginia. And they loved short stories because they could read a short story on the way into work, and then they could read another short story on the way back from work and not have to necessarily worry so much about getting lost in the middle of a novel or having to go back and read the previous chapter if they were in a novel in terms of trying to remember where they were and everything. Every story was sort of self-contained in that collection. So short stories have had a really interesting trajectory here over the last, I'd say 15 to 20 years in terms of publication history and being sort of a more mainstream accepted publication. And now you have agents and publishers that are actively and openly calling for short story collections, aside from those other publishers that I mentioned earlier. They've had an interesting turnabout, which is good to see, but also it's a great way if you're learning to write or you're trying to master the mechanics of writing to dabble in short stories because you learn a lot of the skills that are important to you as you go forward. So without further ado, here are my short reviews of 4 short story collections that I think you're going to love. And if you're new to the genre, maybe you haven't read any short stories since you were reading those literature collections or those literature anthologies in junior high and high school, these would be some really good places to start. And I'm going to start first with a collection of short stories by a classic writer that many of you are familiar with, Zora Neale Hurston. And this collection of short stories is called Hitting a Straight Lick with a Crooked Stick. And I don't know where I've been. I know this collection of short stories came out, I think, a little over a year ago. I don't know what rock I was living under because I love Zora Neale Hurston. Her book, Their Eyes Were Watching God, was one of those books that I read early in my college years that changed my life. It was one of those books that changed my life as a reader and a writer. And these are a collection of short stories that are thematically linked and connected to the Harlem Renaissance and the Harlem Renaissance period of 1925, in which Zora Neale Hurston was in New York City. She was trying to become a writer. She was fledgling and struggling with trying to get her work accepted for publication. And a lot of those early stories, including 6 stories that have never been published before, make up this collection. And so I wanted to just read you just briefly just some information about what's in this collection in case you're interested. Hitting a Straight Lick with a Crooked Stick is an outstanding collection of stories that flash with Hurston's biting satiric humor, which if you've read Their Eyes Are Watching God, you know that. And they share revelations about love and migration, gender and class, racism and sexism that profoundly reflect African-American folk culture. And they're brought together for the first time. 6 of her lost Harlem stories, which were found in some dusty periodicals and archives after her death and have been sort of held in perpetuity by her estate. Those never before published stories are in this collection. I just love this. I love this collection of stories. Again, if you've read Their Eyes Are Watching God and you know a little bit about Zora Neale Hurston and you know a little bit about how she writes and how she approaches those issues of class and sexuality and gender and poverty and all of that goes on in the African-American community, you see a lot of that from Their Eyes Were Watching God. A lot of those themes emerged early on in this collection of short stories. And after I read this collection of short stories, I started thinking back to Their Eyes Were Watching God, and I could see where those themes that she wrote about in Their Eyes Were Watching God came from. They came from a lot of her short stories and a lot of her short story work that was early on done around 1925. When she was in New York and really struggling. I also like this because you get a foreword by Tiari Jones, who is someone I like. There's an introduction with some editing comments from Genevieve West, who curated this collection and kind of reviewed it and put it all together. But this is a great, great collection of short stories. It's got all of Hurston's flair as a writer. But if you're new to short stories, you haven't read a lot of short stories by African-American writers or dealing with some of the themes from the time period of the Harlem Renaissance, this would be a great, great place to get started. I love this. I sat down and read it in a day and a half. I just couldn't put these stories down. And again, if you've read Their Eyes Are Watching God, you're going to see where a lot of those themes and a lot of those issues that she wrote about in that work came from. They came from this collection of short stories. So that's the first collection of stories that I would highly recommend you explore and think about if you're looking to add some more short story reading to your palette and to your reading nightstand or your to-be read list. The next one I'm going to share with you is another collection that I really, really loved. This is by an author named Morgan Talty, and it is called Night of the Living Res. And I just wanted to read a minute, if I could, some information about him. He is a citizen, actually, Morgan Talty, of the Penobscot Indian Nation, which is where he grew up. He was named one of Narrative's 30 Below 30 writers. He's got a lot of short stories that have appeared in great publications like Shenandoah, Lit Hub, and elsewhere. He has been a recipient of the Elizabeth George Foundation and also of the National Endowment for the Arts. And he lives in Maine, outside of Maine, in a town called Levant. And one of the interesting things about this is that Penobscot Indian tribe that he focuses on in this collection is actually located in Maine. They're not out west. They're not out, in the plains areas where you think they would be. This is a small tribal community that still has roots in Maine. And so he writes about that in this collection of stories, Night of the Living Res. And so in this collection of stories, it's set in that native community of Maine, as I was talking about. And this is really an examination of what it means to be a Penobscot Indian and what it means to be a part of that tribe, what it means to live, what it means to survive, what it means to try to make adjustments, living in that community, staying true to your roots, but also trying to find your way out. There's 12 stories in this collection, and you follow a variety of different characters in this story, all connected by friendships and family. And you follow them as they go through a variety of different phases in life. And so, for example, one of the first stories that you'll see in this collection starts with a family when the young boy in the story that kind of pops up quite a bit You see him when he's young. He's, probably upper elementary school, junior high, and he's got a friend who gets him in all kinds of trouble named Ferris, and you're going to follow Ferris all the way through the stories as well. But as the stories go on, these boys grow up, and as the stories go on, Ferris's mother is featured predominantly in this collection. You watch her age and go through various stages of life. You watch the grandmother, and you watch the mother of certain families profiled here in this book age and go through different health challenges and different challenges with raising teenagers. So it's a really great slice of life into what it means to be a Penobscot Indian and what it means to be in that environment in which you are trying to hold true to your roots of community and family, but also for the young children featured in this story as they grow up, thinking about what do they want to do? Do they want to stay connected to this? They want to stay in the tribal area near Maine, or do they want to go off into the world and find out how things are outside of that? So I love these collection of stories. They were so well written, so well done. You really get to know the characters. You really get a chance to get to know each and every one of them, how they relate to each other, why they get along, why they don't get along. All of that is revealed in these stories. Now, these stories are a little bit longer than some short stories you might be familiar with. Even though there's 12 in the collection, some of them are a little bit longer than what maybe you would see in a short story. But I love the fact that they're braided and connected, and the fact that you get to follow these characters, as I said, from kind of early on in their lives to as they move through the various stages of life. So Morgan Talty is an actual, again, a Penobscot Indian, and has connections there and has that heritage. And he reflects everything extremely well in this collection of short stories called Night of the Living Res. Highly recommend it if you want to follow a collection of stories that feature a certain set of characters and really get to know them and watch them grow and develop as you go forward. The next collection of stories I'm going to talk about is from a Nigerian author. His name is Arinze Ifekandu. And this is his book. It is a really, really great book and one that I really love. It's called God's Children Are Little Broken Things. And this is a fantastic collection of stories, all set amongst Nigerian culture and amongst people living in America, living in Nigeria, who are trying to navigate a variety of different experiences with both being Nigerian, but also falling in love. And so there's 9 exhilarating stories in this collection. And what this primarily focuses on is queer love, homosexual love in contemporary Nigeria. Some of the characters, some of the stories spill over a little bit, and have some American underpinnings as well. But most of this is set in Nigeria, focusing on queer love that exists between native Nigerians. And so you learn a little bit about their culture. You learn a little bit about their attitudes towards homosexuality and queer love. Nigeria is not a tolerant nation in Africa. It is not one of those tolerant nations that supports that. And so a lot of what you see here is men and women trying to develop relationships sort of under the guise and under the cover of being noticed by people in the communities in which they grow up. Because they know that it's not tolerated and accepted and very much frowned upon. What I love about these stories, more importantly, in addition to the fact that you see these people trying to find love against some oppressive circumstances, is more importantly, you get a slice of life into Nigerian culture. You learn about how people interact with each other. You get some of the Nigerian dialect, how they change dialects and how they speak English when they're upset about a certain thing. And then they will speak Nigerian when they are trying to communicate something more lovingly to another person, for example. And then they switch dialects and switch accents and switch the way they speak with each other, depending on the circumstances that they're trying to communicate. So you learn that, but you also learn a little bit about, relational Nigerian culture. How are women talked to by men, for example, which is not always good. How do young men talk to older men? How do they talk to their elders? How do they talk to people that are their parents versus people that are business leaders in the community? All of those kinds of things are featured in this collection of stories. Really, really great writing on what draws people together, what love really means, and how do you maintain love and how do you find that love against an environment and a culture that says queer love is unacceptable and that you shouldn't do it and that there's something wrong with you if you pursue it. He tackles all of that here. Now, as I mentioned, he's a native Nigerian. He graduated from the Iowa Writers Workshop at the University of Iowa. He's now working on his PhD at Florida State University in English. So Arenzi has done a great job, great collection of stories, really love these. I just kind of found this accidentally. I wasn't expecting this, and then I saw it at a novel bookstore in Memphis sitting on the shelf, and it looked really interesting, and so I picked it up, and I enjoyed it. You won't be disappointed either. Really, really great writing, really, really good character study about what makes people love one another and how relationships develop in a different culture. I think you'll really, really enjoy it. And then my last collection of stories I'm going to profile today is by a new author that I have never read before. It is called, the title of the collection is called Desperado Days, and the author is X.C. Adkins. And this is from a publisher called Transfer Books, which is a publisher I had never read anything before from prior to this. And I'll just read the back cover of this for you quickly so you get a sense of what's going on here. These stories range from Austin, Texas to New Orleans, from Richmond, Virginia to Philadelphia. So we're all over kind of the Midwest and the East Coast. These are interrelated stories. They lay bare the gritty lives of working class hustlers existing at the intersection of multiple worlds and social castes. So you kind of focus on three main characters in this collection of stories: Levy, Fenton, and Eldridge, and other young people who are searching for purpose and truth among workday lives and the instabilities of self-indulgence, love, violence, and race, fortifying themselves even as they watch others around them flame out and fade. And so those characters I was talking about, Levy, Fenton, and Eldridge, you really get a chance to follow them. This is very similar to Morgan Talty's collection that I was talking about a minute ago, in that these are interbraided stories. And so you see some of these characters pop up in the first story. They might disappear for a story or two and then come back again in the next story. But you get to follow them and follow their exploits as they grow and develop and occupy different phases in life. And as they have wants and desires and needs, and they want a better life for themselves, and they want to be able to step out of the socioeconomic circumstances that they're in and step out of the cultural norms and the cultural mores that have been labeled upon them. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not. And in addition, they're watching their loved ones and people that they care about around them succeed in doing what it is that they want to do, but failing miserably as well. One of the things I loved about this collection of short stories is there's a variety of lengths to them. So some short stories are 4 and 5 pages long, some are just 2 pages long, some are a little bit longer, but everything is braided and connected in terms of following a lot of these characters through and being able to see just exactly what happens to them as you go forward. I really love this. There's just really great writing here, really, really clear, concise writing style that's featured in this collection of stories. And these are characters that you're going to love by the time you get to the end of the collection. So I would highly recommend X.C. Adkins's book called Desperado Days. A variety of great stories here with a cast of characters and a set of circumstances that you're going to love. And you're going to be rooting for these characters, even if they don't always make the best decisions or do what it is you think that they should be doing. So those are 4 short reviews of 4 short story collections that I've been reading lately and recently. And I've really been in this mode of short story reading. I don't know if it's the summertime, if it's the heat, if it's the fact that I'm working on my own collection and sort of the thoughts of short stories are percolating in the back of my mind, but I've been reading a lot of them recently. And again, if you're new to the genre, these are 4 collections that I highly would recommend. If you've been a short story reader for a long time and you're looking just to freshen up your short story collection or your short story collections or your short story to be read pile, these are 4 that are certainly going to do it for you. So thanks again for stopping by the channel. A reminder, all of my social media handles are over here, so please feel free to reach out to me on social media. The subscribe button is right here below. Please subscribe to the channel. Feel free to leave a comment in the comments field about anything we've talked about today. Are you reading a good short story collection that you want folks to know about? Drop it in the comments field and let's have a discussion about short stories. And if you don't like short stories, you don't like short story collections, how come? What is it about that genre that you can't get into or that doesn't appeal to you as a reader? Love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Well, that's going to do it for us this time on Page Break. Thanks again for stopping by. Stay well and see you someplace soon, I hope.